Imagine a normal morning. Soft music plays as you walk into your kitchen and open the fridge, almost empty. It's not forgetfulness. Stores are out, deliveries stalled, and suddenly cash feels useless. A crisis rarely hits with explosions. It begins quietly, in the moment you realize you can't provide for your family as before. Many assume preparing for hard times costs a lot, but often the opposite is true. Every day, inexpensive foods can keep a household calm when everything else falters. Over the past month, I've quietly stocked 10 such items. Cheap, easy to find, and long-lasting. One costs just $1, yet it's often overlooked. When the hard day comes, you won't wish for more money. You'll wish you'd prepared sooner. And that brings us to number 10, baking soda. In a real emergency, the first lifesaver might cost only $1. Not survival gear or rations, just a small box on a supermarket shelf, modest enough that most people ignore it. History shows tough times repeat patterns, and small, overlooked items often make the biggest difference. Baking soda, however, is remarkably stable. Because it's a dry mineral compound with no moisture or oils, there's nothing in it that supports bacterial growth, so it can remain on a shelf for years with barely any noticeable change. If over-the-counter stomach remedies are unavailable, a small, properly diluted amount may offer short-term relief for mild indigestion or that burning sensation. When the power goes out and the refrigerator begins to smell, an open box can help absorb lingering odors. And if commercial cleaning products become too expensive or hard to find, baking soda is still effective enough to handle many simple household cleaning tasks. What many people forget is that a small handful can also help put out a minor grease fire on a stovetop. When exposed to high heat, it releases carbon dioxide, which can help smother the flames. It's interesting to think that something costing around $1 has the potential to prevent damage or injury far beyond its price tag. That said, it isn't something to use carelessly or without limits. Anyone dealing with heart conditions or high blood pressure should be especially cautious about using it for stomach relief, because understanding when not to use something is just as important as knowing when it can help. And to be clear, this is simply a temporary measure. It's never a replacement for prescribed medication or guidance from a qualified medical professional. In the end, the real value isn't the baking soda itself. It's the decision to purchase it before an emergency forces you to look for it. Panic rarely comes from absolute scarcity. More often, it comes from realizing you had the chance to prepare, but didn't. $1 won't guarantee safety. But sometimes, it can purchase something even more powerful, a sense of calm that arrives before fear has a chance to take over. And if you'd like to keep learning practical ways to help your family stay grounded during uncertain times, feel free to like and subscribe to the channel. Here, we don't focus on spreading fear. 9. Potatoes. If you were ever pushed into a situation where you had to survive on just one food, history suggests the answer probably wouldn't be steak or freshly baked bread. It would be potatoes. They're not fancy, they're not costly, but they provide enough calories, enough essential nutrients, and enough fullness to help someone stay on their feet for one more day. And in severe hardship, sometimes surviving one additional day is the thin line between breaking down and pushing forward. There's an honest truth people don't often say out loud. Potatoes are one of the rare foods humans can rely on almost entirely for extended periods. Not because they're flawless, but because they're sufficient. Sufficient energy to keep working. Sufficient nutrition to prevent rapid physical decline. Simple enough that, for centuries, they appeared again and again on the tables of struggling families. Across parts of Europe, especially in earlier centuries, countless households endured brutal winters, wars, and economic downturns with meals centered largely around potatoes. History tends to forget the elaborate recipes from comfortable eras. What it remembers are the foods that kept people alive. And potatoes are firmly etched into that memory. But history also carries a sobering lesson. When the potato crops failed in 19th century Ireland, famine spread with terrifying speed. Millions were driven to emigrate, and countless others never survived long enough to leave. It exposed a harsh reality. Sometimes the stability of an entire society rests on something as unassuming as a root vegetable growing quietly beneath the soil. Even today, the practical value of potatoes hasn't really changed. When budgets tighten, they remain affordable. When power outages make refrigerators unreliable, they can still be stored and cooked with minimal resources. When fresh, perishable foods start to feel like luxuries, potatoes are often enough to prevent the body from slipping into the biological stress of real hunger. I once came across a brief comment under a video about economic hardship. A father explained that during a long stretch of unemployment, his family of four relied heavily on discounted bags of potatoes. He didn't describe gourmet meals or special recipes. He wrote just one simple line: "At least we still had dinner together." And every crisis eventually reinforces the same stark lesson. When options shrink, food stops being about flavor and becomes about survival. Potatoes don't symbolize abundance or indulgence. They represent endurance, the ability to keep going when circumstances grow harsh. For hundreds of years, as other foods gradually disappeared from the table, potatoes were rarely the most exciting thing left. But more often than not, they were the last thing still there. 8. Salt. There are certain parts of daily life we barely register until the day they're suddenly gone. Salt is one of those overlooked essentials. It sits unnoticed on a kitchen shelf, inexpensive and unassuming, so common that we rarely stop to think about what it's truly worth. From a scientific standpoint, pure sodium chloride is remarkably stable. It contains no protein, no fat, and no available moisture, which means it doesn't support bacteria or mold growth. As long as it's stored in a dry, sealed container, salt can remain usable for years, sometimes even generations, with virtually no loss of effectiveness. Long before refrigerators or any real understanding of microorganisms, salt was one of humanity's most critical tools for preserving food. Meat was heavily salted to survive harsh winters. Fish was cured to endure long sea voyages. In many ancient societies, salt was so valuable it was used as a form of payment. In fact, the English word salary traces back to salt, a small linguistic detail that quietly reflects how essential it once was to survival. Today, we don't tend to view salt through that historical lens. But imagine a prolonged power outage that renders freezers useless. In that situation, salt can still help slow spoilage and extend the life of certain foods. When someone becomes dehydrated and physically drained, a carefully measured mixture of clean water, salt, and sugar can temporarily help restore electrolyte balance. It's the same basic concept used in oral rehydration solutions promoted by the World Health Organization. Even for minor cuts or scrapes, diluted salt water has long served as a simple cleansing method, used for generations before modern antiseptics were widely available. I once read a comment from someone describing a winter storm in Texas. Their household lost electricity for nearly 3 days, and the freezer completely failed. But because they had salt on hand, they were able to preserve some of their remaining meat long enough to avoid throwing it all away. It wasn't a dramatic story, no headlines, no heroic ending. But in real emergencies, the line between calm and chaos is often drawn by small, quiet details like that. Salt isn't flashy, it's not costly, and it's certainly not something people boast about stockpiling. Yet when the world outside feels uncertain, a simple jar of salt tucked into a kitchen corner becomes a quiet symbol of foresight. 7. White sugar. Some foods are meant to sustain you for months at a time. Others are there to help you make it through the next few minutes. White sugar clearly falls into that second category. From a scientific perspective, sugar is surprisingly stable. It contains no protein, no fat, and no free moisture, which means it doesn't offer bacteria much opportunity to grow. Mold also has a difficult time surviving in it, provided the sugar is kept dry and tightly sealed. As long as humidity and strong odors are kept away, a simple bag of sugar can remain usable for a very long time with barely any noticeable change. That quiet shelf life makes it one of the most dependable quick energy items you can store. But sugar's real strength isn't how long it lasts, it's how fast it works. When someone is drained from lack of food, when blood pressure dips, or when dizziness sets in after prolonged hunger, a small amount of sugar dissolved in water can provide a rapid boost. It won't solve everything, but it can give the body just enough energy to continue a little farther. Emergency medicine has relied on this principle for decades, restoring basic sugar and electrolyte levels to stabilize someone quickly. The World Health Organization, for example, promotes oral rehydration solutions built on the same foundation of sugar and salt. Not because they are sophisticated, but because they act quickly enough to prevent immediate collapse. Throughout periods of war and famine, survival hasn't always depended on full plates of food. Sometimes it has come down to something much smaller. A cup of warm water with a bit of sugar mixed in. Enough for a mother to gather the strength to carry her child a little farther. Enough for a laborer to stand back up after feeling completely spent. These small recoveries rarely make it into history books, yet they happen again and again in nearly every major crisis humanity has faced. Sugar also offers something less tangible, but deeply human. A sense of normalcy. 6. Carrots. On most emergency food lists, carrots barely get mentioned. They don't pack the calorie punch of rice, they can't compete with beans for protein, and they certainly don't last for decades like salt. But that unassuming nature is exactly what makes them quietly valuable when life starts to feel uncertain. Carrots are typically inexpensive, yet they store far longer than many people expect. Kept in a cool, dark, and dry place, fresh carrots can remain usable for weeks, sometimes even a few months. In parts of wartime Europe, families stored them in underground cellars to make it through long winters. Not because they were a luxury, but because they continued supplying essential nutrients when other foods had disappeared. When a crisis hits, our first instinct is to think about calories. That makes sense. Energy equals survival. But medical science tells a more layered story. A prolonged deficiency in vitamin A can gradually weaken eyesight, reduce immune function, and drain endurance, even if total calorie intake seems adequate. In other words, people don't always fail from immediate hunger. Sometimes it's the slow erosion of micronutrients that does the damage. That's the part many overlook. Communities that endured wars and prolonged hardship rarely survived on meat alone. They made it through by relying on simple, affordable crops they could grow themselves, foods like carrots that quietly delivered essential vitamins. Carrots are rich in beta-carotene, which the body converts into vitamin A, supporting vision in low-light conditions. Before modern lighting, and especially during extended blackouts, that mattered more than we might realize. Their fiber content also helps stabilize digestion when diets become limited or inconsistent. And their mild, natural sweetness offers something subtle but powerful, a reminder of normal life in the middle of disruption. I once saw a short comment during a lockdown. Someone wrote, "The only thing left in my kitchen was a few carrots. Not enough to feel full, but enough to make a hot bowl of soup and feel human again." That captures what carrots really provide. They don't deliver instant fullness. They help prevent gradual decline. In survival situations, calories carry you through today. But steady nutrition determines whether you'll still have strength tomorrow. Sometimes the line between wearing down and pressing on isn't dramatic at all. It might just be a few carrots resting quietly in the corner of your kitchen, waiting for the moment they truly matter. 5. Dry pasta. Some foods exist purely to keep the body functioning. Others serve a quieter purpose. They help life feel steady, even when everything outside is shifting. Dry pasta falls into that second category. Its long shelf life comes down to one simple fact: it's almost completely dry. Without moisture, bacteria struggle to survive, and mold has little chance to grow. Time, on its own, can't do much damage either. Stored in a sealed, dry container, those ordinary-looking noodles can sit patiently for years, waiting for the moment they're truly needed. But pasta's real value isn't just how long it lasts. It's the sense of normalcy it protects when routines begin to unravel. In most emergencies, people don't break down immediately from a lack of calories. The emotional strain hits first when everyday rituals vanish. A typical dinner. The aroma of something warm cooking. The simple habit of everyone sitting at the table together like they always have. With nothing more than boiling water, a bit of salt, maybe a splash of oil or a few leftover canned ingredients, pasta can still become a complete meal. It may not be impressive, but it's warm, it's filling, and most importantly, it's familiar. That familiarity can calm the body and mind in ways that go beyond nutrition. I once read a brief account from a father describing a neighborhood blackout that lasted for days. On the first night, while the entire area was swallowed by darkness, his family managed to cook plain pasta on a small gas stove. No sauce, no meat, just noodles, salt, and a little oil. He wrote that the children felt less afraid after that meal. Not because of anything he said, but because dinner still happened. There's a hard truth that every crisis eventually exposes. What frightens people most isn't always the shortage of food. It's the sense that ordinary life has ended. Pasta isn't the food of extreme, last resort survival. It lives in that delicate space between stability and chaos. A simple bowl of hot noodles can help the human spirit hold steady for one more night. As long as your family can still gather around a familiar meal, even while the world outside changes rapidly, something important remains intact inside that kitchen. There's another reality about crisis that isn't often stated directly. Most people don't collapse on the first day, not because they're exceptionally strong, but because their bodies still have enough reserves to believe things will return to normal. Real hardship doesn't strike all at once. It removes comfort piece by piece. First, the options you're used to, then the feeling of security, then, gradually, the ability to provide for the people you care about. And eventually, the most unsettling realization isn't that food is scarce. It's that you could have prepared earlier and didn't. That's why the foods on this list represent more than nourishment. They represent time, an extra day to think clearly, an extra week to adjust, sometimes an extra opportunity for circumstances to improve. In nearly every crisis throughout history, survival hasn't belonged to the strongest individuals. It has favored those who managed to buy themselves more time. 4. Oats. Not every food that carries us through hard seasons needs to be bold or dramatic. Some of the most dependable things live quietly in the background during peaceful times, only revealing their value when life begins to feel uncertain. Oats are one of those foods. They're steamed and dried in a way that limits moisture, making it difficult for bacteria to grow. Because they contain relatively little natural oil, they don't turn rancid quickly either. In many ways, oats seem built for endurance, steady, reliable, and patient. All it takes is hot water, and they transform into a warm bowl of porridge. It's easy on the stomach, supportive of heart health, and soft enough for both children and aging adults. There's nothing fancy about it. No complex preparation. Just simple nourishment that allows the body to start the day without extra strain. When people talk about surviving crises, the focus is often on getting through the night. But there's a quieter challenge that doesn't get mentioned as often: finding the will to begin the next morning. When uncertainty drags on and difficult news keeps repeating, what fades first isn't always food. Sometimes it's the sense of calm that makes a new day feel possible. A bowl of oatmeal won't fix the outside world. It won't end a crisis or erase instability. But it protects something small and deeply human: the rhythm of a normal morning. And small rituals like that can steady the spirit in ways encouragement alone cannot. In every period of upheaval, the most meaningful achievement isn't always something dramatic. Sometimes it's simply waking up to a quiet morning and beginning again. As long as someone can still sit down to a modest breakfast like warm oats, life, no matter how fragile it feels, has not truly slipped away. 3. Dried beans. Survival hasn't always depended on costly supplies or sophisticated resources. In many of history's hardest chapters, what sustained families were humble, dried seeds. Beans stored away quietly, waiting for necessity to call them forward. Beans last because their natural design resists decay. They contain very little moisture and minimal oil, which means bacteria and mold have little opportunity to grow when they're kept dry and properly sealed. With careful storage, dried beans can remain usable for years while preserving much of their nutritional strength. But their real power isn't just how long they sit on a shelf. What truly sets beans apart is their ability to stand in for foods that suddenly become unaffordable or unavailable. In stable times, most people rely on meat, fish, or dairy for protein. Yet during war, economic downturns, or widespread crop failures, those options are often the first to disappear. When that happens, beans shift from being a simple side dish to becoming a central pillar of survival. They provide enough protein to maintain muscle and stamina, enough calories to keep working, and they're versatile and filling enough to sustain an entire household over long stretches of uncertainty. Across centuries, whether in struggling rural communities or during severe food shortages, beans have consistently shown up as a quiet constant. They may not headline celebratory meals in prosperous times, but they reliably appear on the table when endurance matters most. History keeps repeating a sobering lesson. In crisis, food choices are no longer about flavor or preference. They are about resilience. Dried beans don't symbolize abundance or indulgence. What they offer is simpler and far more practical. Time. Time for a family to regroup. Time to adapt. Time to hold on. 2. White rice. White rice lasts not by chance but because of the way it's processed. During milling, the natural oil layer is almost entirely removed. Without that oil, there's little in the grain that can go rancid over time. That simple durability makes rice one of the most quietly reliable staples humanity has ever kept on hand. Stored dry, sealed, and protected from moisture, a bag of rice can remain usable for many years with virtually no loss of quality. Some emergency reserves reveal a subtle truth. Sometimes food can outlast the very person who stored it. But rice's real value isn't only in its longevity. Its importance becomes clear when scarcity begins to creep in. When familiar foods vanish and people are forced to rely on the most basic, accessible options to survive, rice consistently shows up as a quiet lifeline. Throughout famines and wars, rice has rarely been treated as a luxury. It's not fancy, elaborate, or complicated, yet it provides enough energy to sustain the body and keep people going through prolonged hunger. History leaves a stark lesson. When all choices disappear, survival isn't about taste. It's about what allows you to live another day. And in many parts of the world, that often comes down to rice. A pot of steaming rice doesn't fix the world outside. It can't erase fear or undo collapsing systems. But it sends a small, profoundly important signal. Life continues, and the family still has enough strength to gather together. In fragile, uncertain moments, what keeps people from despair isn't always grand solutions. It's the simple assurance that there is still rice to eat. The quiet aroma rising from a modest kitchen may be the last reminder that the crisis has not yet fully claimed them. 1. Low-cost powdered milk. It may not be the absolute cheapest item on this list, but it quietly protects the body from weakening when fresh milk, meat, and green vegetables slowly become luxuries. Powdered milk has had nearly all of its water removed. Without moisture, bacteria cannot grow. This simple scientific fact allows it to sit safely on a shelf for years, waiting patiently for the day it's actually needed. The value of a box isn't in its weight or size, it's in the tiny nutrients contained inside. Calcium to help keep bones strong. Protein to support recovery. Gentle nutrition suitable for the elderly, the sick, or young children when ordinary meals aren't available. Just a spoon mixed into warm water can become a comforting late-night glass of milk for a feverish child, a final boost of energy for someone utterly exhausted, or simply the reminder that a family still has the ability to care for each other. In many emergencies, the first thing to vanish isn't money. It's the ability to nourish the most vulnerable. The hardest moment comes when you watch someone you love weaken, while nothing in the kitchen seems capable of helping. Powdered milk can't change the outside world. It cannot halt a crisis or erase worry. But it preserves something far more important, the body's ability to make it through one more day. Sometimes, in life's most fragile moments, peace doesn't come from grand gestures. It comes from simply having the means to care for the people you love. That's why this humble item earns the top spot. Not because of its cost, but because when there's still a warm glass of milk in the home, hope has usually not disappeared. Crisis rarely announces itself. It arrives quietly, often when you are least prepared. Advanced preparation doesn't make you richer or more special, but when everything becomes unstable, it preserves something priceless: calm. And in almost every historical crisis, those who maintained that calm were the ones who endured the longest. If you could choose just 3 items to stock ahead of time, which ones would you pick? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read everyone. And if you're quietly preparing without panic, consider subscribing. Here, we don't focus on fear. We focus on readiness, quietly and steadily.